They believe that they have the absolute right to enslave everybody to serve them.
Take the first step towards online privacy. Get NordVPN.
This is an extract of a much longer video. If you want to see the whole thing, go to bit.ly/CryptoRich 3Speak, bit.ly/CryptoRich Odyssey, or bit.ly/CryptoRich Rumble.
It's always about the theft of the commons. It's always about how do you take the assets, how do you take the common assets, and how do you financialize them and use those as collateral for your hypothecation. By the 1600s, the land commons, it didn't really in all the parts of England and the UK end until the 1800s. Most of the land commons had been taken already by the mid-1600s. So what other common is there? People's future. Because populations in a parliamentarian system, populations are actually a lifetime tax earning. That's how they're sport of kings, right? Mm. How do you assess a parliamentarian system at the highest levels in the banking level? You look at each individual as a revenue and liability table, and that changes over time. But you're looking at on this parasitic tax debt and wage slavery system as lifetime earnings off of that person. Well, you need them like real estate. You need that property properly cataloged, properly chartered, right? You have to, we operate in this legal banking system. Every asset's got to have a clarification of what the asset is. And then you assign actuarial tables to what's the lifetime earnings and obligations on them. And then you adjust that every 3-5 years. This is how bankers think.
Right. And so I can get how birth certificates are then collateralized. And then the other thing that's rather dear to my heart that I'm thinking, listening to you, is how KEYSTONE is destroying parents' ability to educate their kids at home. Because one of the great things about England is how free, the incredible amount of freedom parents have in terms of how their own children are regulated, educated. Yes. And just so you know, Ian, my 20-year-old and my 17-year-old never went to school. They were unschooled. Because one of the things that always puzzled me is, why did the British bring schools to India? They didn't want an educated populace. But I can see.
Well, not necessarily true, but yeah, go ahead.
Well, they wanted to say to them, look, we're your lords and masters. Follow our gods, not your gods, and do our bidding.
Well, that was part of it, but you want to increase your asset value.
That's the point I was getting onto, right?
Yeah.
So I understand the stuff about the birth certificates now, the way that you explained it. So then you want to have the future value of the citizenry, and in order to, which means you've got to have more and more control and ownership of that asset. So then these rebellious, independent people, right, who want to bring up their own children in their own way, well, no, we got to destroy that so that we can have them in our schooling factories where we get to mold them so that they're valuable for us and we can collateralize their.
So let's put it in much more precise language for now.
Please do. I talk like a social worker sometimes.
No. So I wrote a book called The Eternal War, and these people are resentfuls in the context of the book. They're a neurological type, and they're about 30% of the population, and they are locked in an all-out war over one concept and idea, power. And we're on the other side of it. They believe that they have the absolute right to enslave everybody to serve them. And we don't believe that. And so we fought for hundreds of years, uniquely the English and the English society and civilization. We fought for hundreds of years, spent about a third of our annual income, thousands and thousands of our lives, ships, everything, fighting the slave trade. Do you think that we actually defeated the slave mind? No, we just forced them to be more sophisticated, more clever. So this move now, to your point, this is late stage. This is just prior to kids just going to chains slavery. If the state can take your kids from when you were young and force them into your training, your mold, your education, etc., that's slavery, straight up slavery. You are forcing them into your system. Now, is it slavery quite like prisons, etc., and chain gangs and all of that? No, but if they try to go against that programming that you pump into them from the time they're just little, they get canceled. It's the same effect as getting whipped or beaten or killed, right, as a chained up slave. And in fact, it's worse because the chains are invisible.
It's abuse at a macro level.
It's slavery.
In order to be able to get away with the abuse, it has to look like it's beneficial.
But what it is, quite honestly, is slavery. Because what is human labor? Human labor is a portion of somebody's life, right? Every day that I labor in thought or effort is life that I've spent. I've exhausted that life, that amount of life. I'll never get that back. What's happened is we have this totally and absolutely unaccountable slavery system everywhere, always, all the time. And it was put in place in the 1600s by these financialists. And it's a straight up slavery system. King Charles I tried to fight it, beheaded him. John F. Kennedy stated it a couple weeks before he was killed. They killed him. A conspiracy to enslave the people. That's what it is. It's slavery. And we need to call it what it is. And it's the antithesis of what it means to be English, because to be English is the exact opposite of that, right? To be English is individual sovereignty and the right to private property. And the first private property is self, my labor, my life, my productivity. We use all these fancy words, but in reality, it's the way they are doing this is the state is increasingly getting the right to take the child and put them in slavery to the state. Taxes, wages, debt. And if you try to get out of that system or not live that way, they'll just put you in prison.
Which this educational welfare bill is threatening to do. Parents can go to prison if they don't educate their children the way the school.
How is that not slavery to the system, to the regime? Let's call it what it is, and let's go to war with it.
Absolutely, that is
as slavers. And it is the absolute antithesis of what it means to be English. And that is, and I'll tell you, there's one other culture and society on earth right now. It's a little different because we've been this way since our beginning, right? Alfred set this up. His Majesty Alfred set this up specifically this way. Post-communist era, the Russians are the same, because this total and absolute enslavement of their people to the state cost them 70 million of their people and destroyed their country and destroyed their people for generations. They don't ever want to go back to that. And what do you need to not allow the kill chain? You got to have a king. You got to have a strong king. And that strong king has to be backed by strong princes. And those princes have to be backed by committed, actively engaged people. Actively engaged in what? Not being enslaved. No matter how sophisticated, no matter if there's velvet around the chains, no matter if the manner, the contract, the social contract around which our formal legal documented slavery uses all these nice and fancy words. Still slavery, and we must fight it.
When tyranny becomes law, rebellion becomes a duty. So said Thomas Jefferson. Go to bit.ly/lawful tax protest or bit.ly/make-war-history and find out why it is a criminal offence to pay central government or local government taxes in the UK. And let's make war history.